So good morning you all once again, and welcome you all on behalf of AKSC 2024 Conference Committee. Our first session is, the speaker of this session is BIJU. BIJU will be presenting on how supremacy travels, transnational flows, and diasporic pathways. That when we have an understanding, when people migrate out of India, they come with a cultural packages, especially they were not able to completely free themselves from the practice of caste. I'd like to introduce BIJU, which definitely it will be a long introduction, but I would like to make it a very short as much as possible.
Very good.
So Professor BIJU Matthew is a prominent labor organizer, co-founding the New York Taxi Workers Alliance and serving as a founding secretary of the National Taxi Workers Alliance, which is a very unique among the Indians in the US. The organization was created in response to growing exploitation of taxi workers in New York City, many of whom were immigrants facing harsh working conditions, low pay, and little and no job security. The success of the Taxi Alliance served as a model for similar organizations across the United States and internationally. His notable works being Caste and Capitalism in New York City. That's a book he has written and published in 2005. I think BIJU is one of the activism, the fighting for the Uber workers, that they were able to win several $1 million from the Uber. I think he would mention in his talk. Then BIJU's academic career has been closely intertwined with his activism, allowing him to combine theory with practice in a way that has a significant impact on community he serves. He is a professor at Rider University, where he teaches information system and American studies. So somehow we thought the speakers today are not completely the engineering background, but we cannot help ourselves. His academic background is rooted in understanding the intersection of technology, labor, and social justice, which has informed much of his work both inside and outside the classroom. Finally, with respect to activism, because when AKSC invite or shortlist a list of people, that we did not expect only the scholars or the people, those who are writing and publishing the work, only the intellectual work, but also who is on the ground and pretty much part of the movement, connected with the grassroots. So as far as BIJU's contribution concerned, that his activation, particularly in relation to his critique of Hindu nationalism, he has remained steadfast in his commitment to social justice, continuing to speak out against oppression and inequality wherever he sees it. I would like to stop.
Just to fill in some gaps from what Karthik was saying before I really get going on my talk. So most recently, in New York City, we had a historic settlement with Uber, where Uber paid back New York City Uber drivers, Uber and Lyft drivers, $328 million in stolen wages. This is the single largest settlement in the history of New York City Attorney General's office. And on the very same day, based on a case that we had filed, the New York State Department of Labor settled with Uber on arrears to unemployment insurance that totaled, in our estimate, to over 600 million. So in one day, Uber settled $1 billion because of cases we filed. So I think that's just the product of about 28 years of work. Right? I think that's the thing that we need to remember, that some of the work that all of us are undertaking together is long haul work. It's not short haul work. It's not work that will be turned around. You will see some results. That depends on how strategic you are, but it is long haul work in the end. Okay, so having said that, let me begin to talk about the subject of the day, which is the question of Hindu supremacy in the diaspora, how it travels, what it does, how it works, etc., etc. On October 21st, 2022, at Mar-a-Lago, that is Trump's Florida mansion, the mansion looked very different. If you looked at it from the street, what you could see of it, against the night sky, it looked like a Rajasthani royal palace. That's how it was bejeweled. And inside, there were 182 quote-unquote Hindu leaders who were meeting with Trump to begin the process of his 2024 campaign and its relationship to an organization called the Republican Hindu Coalition, the RHC. The RHC was founded in 2015 and is seen, can be seen as emblematic of a particular shift within South Asian politics, within Indian American politics, within Hindu American politics. One of the key figures behind the RHC is a guy called Shalabh Kumar, a Chicago-based multimillionaire who created RHC, was the founding chair of the RHC, etc., whose political career is very short-lived. What I want to start with, therefore, is this idea that Hindu and Republican comes together very, very recently. It comes together less than 15 years ago. The earliest traces we see is the emergence of candidates, political candidates like Nikki Haley. And for instance, you can see the relationship between Shalabh Kumar and Nikki Haley because that's the first political campaign that this Chicago millionaire, who then powers Indian American politics into the center stage of the Republican Party, he is instrumental to it. And the first political campaign he works on is Nikki Haley's gubernatorial campaign in South Carolina, right? So, and that's 2010. We are in 2024. It's 14 years. It is this 14 or 15 years wherein you see the activities of a certain community, the Hindu community, quote unquote, and its relationship to a party like the Republican Party. Why am I emphasizing this? Because prior to this moment, prior to the emergence of this political moment that has emerged over the last 15 years, what we have had is a kind of a double-speak structure of multiculturalism, right? That is, the Hindu right, the Hindu supremacist movement has always and fundamentally existed under the umbrella of the Democratic Party and liberalism more correctly. That is Hindu conservatism, Hindu supremacy existed always inside the Democratic Party within that framework of liberalism as part of being the multicultural victim. That is, as part of being a minority in American society. That is the long history. You can go back to all of the Hindutva institutions, from the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, which starts out under specific instructions of the RSS back in the 1970s. The RSS sends people out to the United States to start up an organization, which is what VHP of America becomes. The HSS, the Hindu Swayam Sevak Sangh, follows shortly thereafter. But in many ways, the VHP of America can be seen as the fountainhead of Hindu supremacy in the United States. Post the emergence of the HSS in the 1980s, you begin to see VHP and HSS in the 1980s, you begin to see by the early 90s a certain kind of restructuring in terms of, you see organizations like the Hindu Student Council emerging on college campuses. That's 1991. I think it's Michigan Ann Arbor is the first of the HSCs that are formed. And a plethora, Seva International starts up, a plethora of Hindutva organizations almost in the exact same format as in India, right? Which is the RSS exists as a fountainhead, an unregistered, undeclared organization in many ways, without even a clear bank account. And it has a 1,000, a million heads that are there as hundreds of organizations that exist all across India. And in our case here, we again begin to see that, and we begin to see that formation begin to grow here all through much of the 80s and the 90s. In the early 2000s, you begin to see the first set of breaks from that pattern where the second generation moves to create a more strategic set of organizations, and you begin to see formations like Hindu American Foundation, etc. emerge. Right? The HAF emerges as kind of with a critique of the first generation organizations. If the first generation organizations are entirely inspired and structured through a particular kind of thinking that is deep from within the RSS, the HAF marries that with a particular kind of American politics of liberalism and brings the entire Hindu supremacy movement under the rubric of multiculturalism and under, in that sense, in terms of political party formations, the party's political home had always been the Democratic Party, and it continues to build on that frame. Right? So that's what you begin to see by the early 2000s. So it's a 25-year history or a 30-year history of Hindu supremacy in the United States that you begin to see shift in about 2010, 2011, 2012, and the shift, the most emblematic, as I claim, the emblematic person in that frame can be somebody like Shalabh Kumar, right? The point that is important here is as follows, right? Ajinkya mentioned some of these numbers a moment ago. There are, the politics of this is very clear. That is, we have anywhere between 5 to 6 million Indians in the United States, Indian Americans in the United States. Out of that 5 to 6 million, 51% identify as Hindu, which is extremely different from what happens in India. In India, the standard number that you hear is 79% are Hindu, 80% are Hindu, whereas the number is only 51%. So now the question is, what is about the remaining 50%? What about the remaining 49%? That's broken up in a very interesting set of ways. It's broken up with about 13% as Muslims, which is almost the same as what is in India. You have about an outsized number of Indian Christians, about 10 to 11% Indian Christians, as against 2% in India. 7 to 8% Sikhs, as against, again, 2% in India, 2 to 3% in India. Right? So those are the two outsized populations. Both of them are minority populations. But even that doesn't account for everything. There's about 16 to 17% of Indian Americans who do not identify with any religion at all. That could be many of us, of course, but it could also be a lot of second generation Indian Americans, right? So those are in a very quick snapshot of the demographics. If that's the demographics, then I think the big question is this 51%. As Ajinkya said, the numbers are very clear. Only about 17, 18%, about a third of that 51%, makes any active claim to being Hindu supremacists. Right? That doesn't mean that the remaining 30-odd% are not Hindu supremacists or not influenced by Hindu supremacy at all. But there's a small minority, 15, 16, 17, 18%, that are active Hindu supremacists in the United States, in the entire diasporic population. Okay. The remaining 30% of quote-unquote those who are counted as Hindus, there's again enough evidence to suggest that there's at least 15%, again a third approximately, who are positioned against Hindu supremacy, right? Who have clarity in terms of political positions as not being Hindu supremacist at all, who are not in the quote-unquote Modi orbit at all. That leaves the middle 15% of the third, another third, which could be pro-Modi, pro-Hindutva, pro-supremacist, but connected to business decisions and all sorts of things like that. All of this to say why this quick number crunching is important is just to point out one simple thing. If you take even that 30%, the 2/3 of that 51%, right? If you take even that percentage of 34, 35%, you have 65% who is part of the base that you're struggling for and with. Some of them are already with you, right? Some of them are in the middle somewhere. Some of them are politically disengaged, right? So that's the broad frame in terms of if you want to start thinking strategy, that's where you have to start thinking, right? So there are two things that I put down here. First, I pointed to a kind of a break in quote unquote Indian American politics, where Indian Americans largely, and therefore quote unquote this category called Hindu Americans, always rested within a liberal frame under the aegis of multiculturalism, within a party formation like the Democratic Party. That has been the history for over 3 to 4 decades since the 1960s Immigration Act and everything that followed from there, even as supremacists showed up here in large numbers as part of that caste and class migration structure, wherein primarily an upper caste migration was what we started with. Given all those demographics, the presence of Hindu supremacy, but Hindu supremacy always existed under the aegis of liberal multiculturalism as victim communities of American racism, and therefore always positioned as people who are pro-immigration, a whole bunch of liberal progressive positionalities in terms of American politics. And that's the contradiction that they were always faced with. The contradiction they were faced with was that they could be as liberal and as progressive when it comes to US politics and their positionality as a victim minority, right? Yeah, and I'm saying this with a little bit of I don't know what to say, a little bit of a sense of irony, right? In the sense that it is indeed true that white supremacy exists. It is indeed true that racism is a humongous problem in the United States, and therefore that all of us, all immigrant communities, including Indian American immigrant communities, face the brunt of racism in one form or another, not in the exact same ways or not even with the velocity that some other communities face, but certainly do face it. So I don't want to belittle it and say it doesn't exist, right? When the Hindu supremacist population also positions itself as quote unquote a victim of American racism. But there's also a particular kind of irony to it because they are, of course, the politics is exactly the opposite when they think about India. Right? That is, their supremacist politics is largely aimed at crushing the minority, both the religious minorities as well as the lower caste minorities. Right? So that is the approach that they have. But the irony goes beyond that because in many ways, it's a particular instrumental use of the victim status, right? Having admitted or having said that being subject to American racism is indeed a very material phenomena for all immigrants, I do want to say that there's a particular way in which liberal multiculturalism, especially when instrumental groups like Hindu supremacists enter that framework and say, we are victims of white American racism. When they are, I mean, I wrote this in an article way back in the 90s, and I said that the Hindu immigrant, the Hindu upper caste immigrant to the United States is white before they leave the shores of Bombay. Right? That before they even depart, because they've been brought up on a diet of white supremacist culture, right? Everything from seeing Clint Eastwood bash up the black guys, or a completely mentally disturbed or infantilized black imagery, etc. Right? So that's what they grow up on, and so they're white before they leave the shores of Bombay and show up here, right? But it's precisely that they enter knowing all of that and instrumentalizing that frame and enter into a liberal multicultural framework and position themselves as victims because there's a particular way in which 40 or 50 years of liberal multiculturalism has taken this idea of victim, taken this concept of the victim and turned that itself into a capitalist commodity, right? So to produce value within liberalism, you have to sometimes position yourself as a victim and put that victimhood on a shelf, right? So there's a particular way in which that works, and that's what they have done. So this is the 40-year history. From that 40-year history is the break that I'm epitomizing through somebody like Shalabh Kumar. And when you think about that, there's something very interesting happening there, right? Shalabh Kumar at Mar-a-Lago that night, if you look at the promises that Trump made that night to the 182 Republican Hindu coalition leaders who were gathered there, almost entirely, every single promise that was made was either a foreign policy promise that aids, that is kind of connected to an Indian/Hindu nationalist position in relation to India, right? That is really having a very hard attitude towards China. That's one of the promises that Trump makes in that Diwali dinner for the 182 RHC leaders. Right? Alongside that, he's also making promises like Hindu-American appointments in the bureaucracy. Alongside that, he's also making promises about how there's got to be a special policy on immigration for professional Hindus. Right? So it's a whole bunch of, we are going to be white supremacist when it comes to immigration, because the same RHC, the Republican Hindu Coalition, in Trump's first term, promised or pledged $25 billion to the construction of the wall along the border, along the Mexican border. Right? So they are part of that politics. They are part of an anti-immigrant politics. There's a part of a politics of criminalizing people of color, especially poor immigrants who are coming across borders. So they're talking about that wall. They are pro that, but Trump's promise is promising a carve-out for a specific upper caste bloc, right? That's essentially what the politics of that is. I'm bringing this up in this particular way because if you look at what RHC, I'm going to use RHC as a kind of a stand-in and Shalabh Kumar as a kind of a stand-in for a slightly broader politics than that, right? So if you look at it, it starts with Nikki Haley and company at one level, and then there is this quote-unquote think tank that is started up, and the think tank tries to promote Modi before he becomes prime minister from here. That is, Shalabh Kumar and company organized tours of US Congress people to India to meet the Chief Minister of Gujarat, thereby trying to normalize his image and normalize or get past the visa ban issue and kind of make him acceptable within a different frame, saying, oh, American politicians are now meeting him, etc., etc. This is all prior to 2014. And of course, post-2014 is RHC. Steve Bannon becomes a co-chair of the RHC, etc., etc., etc. Right? The other person who's really part of the story, even before Trump, Nikki Haley is just a candidate. But if you look at Republicans who are really part of the story, it's, what's his name, the Texas Congressman, Pete Sessions, right? And then Newt Gingrich, right? So where I'm headed with this is there's something very, very interesting happening here. One of the ways of thinking about American politics is to say that at this moment, the Democratic Party, you can think about it as having three blocks within it. There is a centrist bloc that Biden represented. There is the old Keynesians, the people who kind of sort of believed in government spending and, producing an American middle class, trying to defend that idea of an American middle class, white middle class particularly, but also putting out a certain set of things, especially in its later years, that would be supportive of African American middle class growth, etc. also. So that's the Keynesian center of the Democratic Party. The right wing of the Democratic Party is Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Obama, that whole neoliberal gang within the Democratic Party. And then you have the emergent left within the Democratic Party, which one might say is Sanders, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, etc., the squad. Right? So you can think about the Democratic Party as having three blocks with a big center and a somewhat big right wing and a very small left, right? So that's, and Harris belongs to that center right, right? Harris is both part of that right wing in terms of the Democratic Party, but also close to the center in terms of Biden, etc. At the other end of the Republican end, you can break the Republican Party into two blocks at least. One is the traditional business conservative Republican. That is, those who are represented by, old figures, including the Bushes, including George Bush, etc., the Cheneys. Liz Cheney kind of is a losing Republican from within that frame. It's the old conservative guard. When they say the grand old party, it's the grand old party's core, which is a Republican business core, right? Very conservative, connected to big money in terms of oil, fossil fuels, all of those things, and also a particular kind of idea of America, right? And then there is what emerges with the Tea Party, the ultra-right within the Republican Party. And at this point, one can argue that the right, the white supremacist and the Christian supremacist right within the Republican Party has more or less hegemonized the party. That the old conservative guard of the Republican Party has shrunk and is in a minority. What is really important about the Shalabh Kumars of the world is that they pole vault over the old core of the Republican Party. They constantly negotiate with the old core of the Republican Party, but can't find their way into the Republican Party and therefore stay with the Democratic Party. Right? And it is the emergence of the right wing, the white supremacists within the Republican Party, and the slow hegemony that the Tea Party started within the Republican Party that allows for a particular kind of sudden pole vaulting over the old core of the Republican Party to the white supremacists. And it's that link, that relationship between the Hindu supremacists and the white supremacists that's in formation or already well on its way. So what one needs to think about, therefore, is that Hindu supremacy is part of what I'm going to call, in the US, because of the way in which US politics is structured, we have, over the last 2 decades, focused very correctly on white supremacy, right? We've gone to, the growth of the collapse of the old civil rights movement, the slow erosion of its leadership in American society, and then its amazing rebirth and reemergence to the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for Black Lives, all the different formations that have emerged over the last 15 years in the United States to pick up that battle once again, right? And white supremacy, as it grew, encountered the challenge. Now, that battle against white supremacy is very well framed, but I want to reframe it a little bit. I want to argue that what we are up against is not simply a battle against white supremacy in the United States, but against a multiracial right. What is at play is a particular emergence of a multiracial right. And that multiracial right is going to be both a push and pull multiracial right. What's going to happen there is there are what I call the 3 pins of the multiracial right, which is the white supremacist movement alongside the Christian right. That's one block. Then you have the Zionists. You cannot, of course, not think about the Zionists and their enormous hegemonic power within US politics. They have had a stranglehold in many ways over US politics, the Zionist movement in the US. But we must also realize that the Zionist movement on the ground in the US is weakening, even though that doesn't seem like what's happening post-October 7th. But if you look at where the Jewish American community is, then the Zionist movement is in a little bit of trouble. And the third pillar of it, the third node of it, I would argue is the Hindu supremacists. The Brahminical Hindu supremacist forces are emerging as a third node. They're still a weak node within that formation. They are nowhere near the biggest node. They are in their initial moment. They are in their first 10 years of existence, and it will, in political parlance, it takes about 25 to 30 years for a political position to establish and mature itself within a broader framework. So the Hindu supremacists are just starting out on the journey. So if you do want to crush them, this is the moment. Right? I'm thinking, I'm switching for a moment to a strategic register. Right? If you think about it in strategic terms, then if you want to respond to them politically so as to cripple them, to stop them, to block them, you use any word you want to use, then this is the moment. You can't wait another 10 years and do it. Right? But now coming back to this three-pillar thing, I'm convinced it's not going to be just the three-pillar thing. Other immigrant communities and their right wings are all going to enter this frame. And they're all going to, if liberal multiculturalism was a particular frame, then we have to think about what is a multiracial right going to look like? What is the theoretical resolution of that concept? How do you think about the idea that there's something called white supremacy that can somehow sit at the table with Hindu supremacy, with Brahminical supremacy? Right? You have to ask that question. Because within liberal multiculturalism, there is a particular theory of why they are all at the table. Within the idea of a multiracial right, we have to still ask the question, how do they all sit at the table? What is the negotiation? And if the Diwali party at Trump's mansion is an indication, then a lot of it is going to be focused on, it's a particular kind of agreement which says that you help Hindu supremacy grow somewhere else, that is in India, and you protect our community. You give us a carve out, make us white, right? Give us some status that is adjacent to being white. That's what it is, right? Give us, okay, we are not really white, but give us an adjacent status to it, right? It's exactly what the RSS did with British colonialism, remember that, right? So some framework of that sort is, I myself am thinking my way through what is that resolution of the multiracial right? How is that multiracial right going to actually exist? Because I do see other communities entering it. A lot of other people of color communities have their right wings, and they're going to enter that space, right? And there's a push and pull. The Hindu supremacists are going there as a push. They are forcing their way into that, right? Because Hindu supremacists have no problem standing up and saying, we are all for LGBTQ rights, right? They will do a greenwash also. So I think, whereas, for instance, the Republicans, the same white supremacists are reaching out to, let's say, the Islamic right, on issues of LGBTQ and drawing them in only on that one issue. So there's a very complex set of ways in which this idea of a multiracial right is being formed. We all have to watch it, understand it, theorize it, strategize around it, build a base that will respond to it, do all of that work over the next 5 to 10 years. Right? That's, in a certain sense, the political agenda, but the broader agenda has to be one of understanding these shifts, right? And understanding, see, it's no, how do I say this? It's no surprise. I wasn't surprised when you had Kamala Harris emerge as the political candidate at one end, Vivek Ramaswamy emerge at the other end, and then Usha, what's her name? Chilukuri, right? Vance and emerges. On both sides of the political debate, you have the upper caste formations emerging, right? That's the fascinating part about this, right? So, and that's just a structural fact. It's a structural fact of what Ajinkya mentioned, the 65 immigration bill and everything that followed. It's a structural fact of what the reality of caste and class has been in India and what this migration here has meant. That so early, this particular community emerges on both sides of the aisle, right? And so the second side of the aisle is where we are going to see the emergence of that multiracial right. And I would, part of the reason why, I don't know whether my comrade Woods is already here, but there's a long conversation that's been happening within the broader American left, especially the new left within the United States, that as to how to take on this multiracial right. When I stand here and say there's something on the multiracial right and that we need to respond to it, that's a conversation I'm having here with all of us here, with AKSC, for instance, just over the last 3 or 4 or 5 months. But in terms of a broader left politics in the United States, it's a conversation that we've begun and I'm having for at least for the last 2 or 3 years. Right? So that's what we need to take forward, and I'm really looking forward to an engagement. What I hope I've conveyed is a certain set of frameworks and simultaneously absolute clarity that I don't have all the answers. I don't have full clarity, and that clarity has to emerge through a conversation amongst all of us. So it's an invitation, and I'll stop here. Thank you.
So, thank you, Biju, for really a very insightful, thought-provoking talk. Definitely I can add a lot, but I don't want to take much of your time as I took in the introduction. But I would like to definitely reflect very quickly within a minute or two that the way you stitched together the complete history of the rise of the Hindu supremacy with relation to the multiracial right, with the different social forces involved in it over the period of 30-40 years in the US, it gives a very precise position how we landed now. And you did not stop only there, you touched upon various things. Definitely what is our fight and where the enemy positioned himself. Like within the Democratic Party, the left, center and left, and right, center and left, and also within the Republican Party. And also you have given a very important thing, that is a hope that they are not invincible. Still we are able to organize ourselves to defeat them, which AKSC always learned that despite the AKSC is a very small force, I will not say the weak force, but definitely it is a force to be reckoned with, at least in the Bay Area. I do not know, yet we have to develop the national level organization to challenge them with to make a clear ideological understanding with all the grassroots. So once again, thank you. I have a couple of questions, but I don't want to go first. And also, thank you, Biju. You just stopped on time. The 29th minute you stopped. And so we have, let's have questions. And first we will have only the questions. If you have comments, please reserve for some time. And how many people have questions? Yeah, thanks. Then we will go with all the questions. But before asking the question, just to say your name and make the question also very short. Can we? You want to take all the questions or one by one?
Take about 3 questions at a time. Okay. That way it's easier.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Suraj. Nice to meet you again. My question is, can you tell us the playbook that Zionists use in lobbying at the Congress and the playbook that the Hindu nationalists are using, how different and how similar are those? Because my impression is that the Zionist forces, they use more of a technological, defense, scientific kind of forefronts where they want to have more collaboration with US and Israel. But I was wondering if in terms of Hindu nationalists, it's kind of different, I think. So can you tell us the difference between that?
Hi, my name is Palashi. My question is to ask you to reflect a little bit on the relationship of all of this with the question of labor, if you can, and coalition building around sort of thinking about the permanent sort of minoritization of certain kinds of people that is sort of a shared characteristic of the multiracial right that you're talking about and how to exploit them. And so I wonder if there's reflections based on the work that you've been doing for decades on how the shift needs to happen on the front of organizing the left around labor, if there is any, and how that needs to contend with the multiracial right differently than what we have been doing so far. So, thank you.
Who else here? Somebody else raised their hand here. Okay.
Also,
Hi, Ranga Krishnan, live in San Jose. One question in connection with the upcoming elections. All of this 10-year organizing, etc., is, I guess, presuming the Republicans don't win, because I think things will drastically change if they do. And currently, it looks like the Democrats have a decent chance of winning the presidency, but we know that they have Republicans have a plan of throwing the election to the House by decertification of votes at state level, etc. So, have you, in the sort of left organizing that you mentioned, thought about how, if that ends up in the Supreme Court, what would be the action to try to prevent this kind of outcome?
That's 3 questions. That's 3 questions, so I'll let you answer.
Yeah, I can take the 3 on quickly, and I'll do assuming you have about 20-25 minutes of Q&A, I'm going to try and turn each round around in 5 minutes, so that we have 5 or 6 rounds. So, I mean, Radhakrishna, your question on the, throwing the election to Congress and then Supreme Court, there's a lot of conversations happening within the left there on that front. There's a lot of strategizing happening on that front in terms of, how to make the election, make it difficult for the right to do that, etc. But I won't go into it here simply because I myself don't know whether I have full control over that conversation right now, because I've been out of it for about 2.5 months, because I've just come back literally 5 days ago from India. So that entire set of conversations within the left, I think we should bring it up again in the second session with Woods. Woods will probably be really well informed about those conversations, right? Second, now going backwards, Parash's question, there's a very peculiar aspect to the demographics of the Indian American community in the United States. Let's say you take 3 immigrant communities, Indian American, Chinese American, and let's say Guatemalan American or Mexican American. The latter 2 communities, there's a particular predominance of the working class, right? Whereas in the Indian American community, that is not so clear. There is a very clearly marked working class, no question about it. But then that notion of the working class begins to fray when you enter the technical spaces, right? I mean, really speaking, we are in the heart of actually a very, very big Indian American working class settlement. But the problem is that a large part of that working class doesn't think of itself as the working class, right? They are truly integrated into a property owning, American white imaginary. So how do you mobilize a particular working class politics is a big, huge question, especially also because within the working class in the United States, the clearly marked Indian American working class in the United States is so specifically, ethnicized, that is, there's a huge Punjabi component to it, right? There's a huge, and so, if you think about it that way, it becomes even more complicated. And then comes the big middle chunk, which is, if you are forced to leave out a large part of the software workers, because it's a whole different organizing game to play there, and you mark out the working class spaces like the ones that I'm part of, the taxi workers, right? wherein 50% of our workforce in New York City is Indian slash is South Asian, right? But it's South Asian, it's not Indian. And if it's Indian, it's only Sardar almost entirely, right? But who's the big chunk in this 5 to 6 million? That middle chunk of 4 million is largely petit bourgeois, right? It's small traders, etc., etc. And I'm saying that there's a particular way in which we need to take on the question of organizing that small trader, that small business community. We need to think about that in a different frame because the politics of power requires it, and because the nature of the American economy under neoliberalism is shifting, wherein those people can, I believe, be organized in some conjunction with the working class. So that's my first take on it, and we can elaborate that in great detail, a lot of theorizing to do there. Now moving to the Zionist playbook. Well, I'll just say two very quick things, and we can keep taking this issue up as we go along, which is they are following the Zionist playbook. There is no question. How close can they get to the Zionist playbook? It's a whole different ballgame. They can get very close to the Zionist playbook when it comes to foreign relations, when it comes to American foreign affairs, right? Because American foreign affairs, you must realize, is the one aspect of American bourgeois politics which is the least subject to democratic control. And I mean the word democratic in terms of people's control. That is, on the question of race within the United States, once you start mobilizing American politicians really because they have to get elected here, they begin to get squeamish about it, and there's some degree to which we can impact it. Whereas foreign affairs, no. Anything that's reframed as American interests, a large part of the American population goes with it, right? And so Israel is part of that frame, and India, I always call Adani, as India doesn't have the same strategic location within world armaments trade, defense industry, but Adani is the closest we are getting. Adani enters the world industrial space as what I call infrastructure, energy, and defense. Defense is the smallest component, but it's infrastructure, energy, and defense together. And that is where the Zionist playbook will come back. That's the new relationship with India as against China. Global climate change questions, all of it will come. That's one thing I did not even raise. I mean, when I say that we are faced with the kind of situation we are faced with in terms of the growing right, the reason the right is growing is because of the two humongous contradictions. The contradiction of neoliberalism and the contradiction of climate change. That's what's making for the fundamental anxieties that produce a political moment, right? And so we are headed in that direction. In that frame, India is well positioned to play out the Zionist playbook to the degree it can in a very short time frame. There's the other part, locally in the United States, where they're not very well positioned to play out the Zionist playbook, right? They will keep imitating. There's the Hindu on campus exists. The RHC, the Republican Hindu Coalition, is framed right after what? The Jewish Republican Coalition, right? It's exact carbon copy of it. But there is no Holocaust, right? So, it's just that fact that they'll keep trying to position themselves as victims, but that's going to be far more difficult. And we've got to use the fact that it's difficult. I'll stop there.
Yeah, we'll take 3 more, 4 more. Yeah. Take the next 3 questions. Before that, I would like to quickly respond to Palashi, because that is a discussion we are also having within AKSC for a long time of the fact that most of the members of the AKSC, like 90%, are from the software. We consider as with our economical position as a working class, but loosely called by the liberals as a petty bourgeois. But we don't agree with. We are a working class because we are selling our labor. Perhaps we are paid more than that. And we are taking some lessons from the history. The same question what Palasi asked, and also you explained, the same situation for in the 1930s also. What is the position of the working class, especially the middle and the lower paid class, towards fascism? And many people were Dagolti and Trotsky were discussing, and Trotsky went and wrote a book called What is Fascism and How to Fight It, which we took in one of our AKSC discussion. So Trotsky put an interesting argument that predominantly many people were thinking that the middle class is apolitical and they cannot be politicalized at all. But the fact was, when the fascists were organizationally strong, the middle class of the Germany switched their political position overnight towards the fascist. Why? Because there is no organized democratic force in the Germany. And the organized democratic force in the Germany was dismantled because of the propaganda of the pre-fascist era. So here it's not the question that we have to divide the people, especially on the position in their economics. Our position is, AKSC's position is, there is a struggle and challenge for each section of workers in their own domain. Perhaps the fight, the lowly paid or the people, those who are the blue collars, the challenges they face because of the Hindu supremacist or any other supremacist forcing is different. But definitely there are challenges for the software engineers also within this Hindu framework, in the Hindu supremacist framework. For example, that even when somebody is trying to do a startup or trying to generate products by getting the venture capitalist fund, the same funds are not easily available for the non-Brahmins. And take promotions and full-time conversions, which is very easy for the upper caste people, but not easy for them. But what we have to do is people, those who have the conscience that there should be an organized force which will convert the spontaneous movement in the history on their side, have to continuously mobilize the forces with respect of whatever Ajinkya also mentioned, what is the ebb and low, the low and rise of the spontaneous movement. And that is what AKSC was very consciously doing. Definitely we have a lot to unpack and zoom in. We will do perhaps today or later in the day. Now we can go for the next set of like 3 or 4 questions. We'll go for 4.
Hi Biju, this is Manoj. Among the things you told us was about, of course, the Hindu supremacist group. I want to bring up this question of how they were celebrated in the Indian media at some point when they achieved apparently a degree of success in challenging the portrayal of Hindus in textbooks in certain states, the success they achieved in doing so. So I would like you to tell us a bit about that. The next one is that when you were talking about the multiracial right, somehow there was no mention, if I'm not mistaken, about the 2 largest minority communities, the Hispanics and blacks. I have in mind somebody like, say, Clarence Thomas, who was supposed to have been part of the right for a long time, and his record in the Supreme Court does bear out that suggestion. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that too. Yeah.
Hi, Biju. I'm Anu, and I'm reflecting on your idea of the new multiracial right, and it reminds me what I remember studying about in South Africa, how Japanese in South Africa were considered honorary whites because of the economic power of Japan and the desire of South Africa to trade within a powerful Japan. But Chinese were not in that category. And so when you said like the Hindu supremacy is trying to, seeking honorary whiteness, I see a pattern there. Yeah, with the burgeoning economic power of India. But I'm curious as to what the other ethnic groups that you see, like just behind Indians, attempting to achieve honorary whiteness, and are their countries of origin also economically powerful?
Connect to Manoj's question.
So my name is Dilip Babu Nagabhushnam. So my question is, like a decade rule of Modi government, how much impact or how much is the rise of Hindutva across the world? Because I see like 150 activists across the world, they were rejected, like OCA cards have been rejected, like they are struggling still to enter to India. So even here, I saw one activist, he is suffering. So what is the role of Modi government like a decade for the rise of Hindutva?
Hello, Doctor. Thank you for the speech. That's very insightful. My question is, I want to understand your thoughts on how the three forces, the trinity of forces you mentioned about white supremacy and the Zionist forces and the Hindu supremacy, how they operate in the rhetoric of claiming victimhood, right? Because the way I see it is trying to draw a parallel between all these three. If you take the whiteness, which is the white supremacy, they try, whenever there is the social movement like Black Lives Matter comes, they try to dilute it with the counter narrative like Blue Lives Matter. And similarly, the Zionist force, whenever we try to counter the attack and atrocities in Palestine, they come up with, they try to put forth their historical tragedies that happened during World War II and try to claim the victimhood and try to put a counter narrative to counter it. And similarly, the Brahminical forces, they always try to claim victimhood, not just the Brahmins, but also the upper caste people who are aligned with the Brahminism, try to always claim the victimhood as if they are the victims of this, all the things that happened in India after post-independence for the oppressed. So what do you think about countering? Because the moment we get into that argument, it all comes to the point like trying to show who is the bigger victim here. So what can we do strategically to counter those narratives? That's my question. Thank you.
You want to take one more question or?
Yeah, sure. One.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Suhas. I know this has come up a bit already, but I'm curious to get your thoughts more on how we should be drawing, should or maybe shouldn't be drawing connections between the so-called educated or credentialed working class and the blue-collar working class within Indian or broader South Asian circles, and whether you think there need to be organizing struggles waged within these various groups first, or whether we should start, drawing broader connections, general thoughts. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, again, I'll go in the reverse order. So I'll start with your question, Suhas. Unfortunately, I am a person who does not believe in ethnic working class organizing. I believe in working class organizing. And I think there's a fundamental contradiction when you try to organize a certain segment of the working class around its ethnicity. The Karthik referred to my history, one of the co-founders of the Taxi Workers Alliance. The Taxi Workers Alliance came out of a project called Lease Drivers Coalition, which was within an organization called the Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence. And so I went into that project to organize South Asian American taxi drivers. And within a year, I was like, I can't do this. I'm standing in the middle of the airport holding lot in LaGuardia, talking to a Desi driver, and an African brother walks up and talks to me. What do I do? Do I say, no, boss, you are not my base? No, I can't. He is as much my base in terms of my politics, in terms of my consciousness, in terms of my ideology, in terms of what I think it will take to win. Right? So that's the problem. Now, I do believe that there's a new model there wherein we organize something like affinity groups around ethnic working class structures alongside a clearly marked relationship to a larger working class organization. If you grow ethnic working class affinity groups, community groups without a clear connection to a broader working class formation, then it remains powerless, right? Or it becomes minimally powerful. You'll see, okay, you'll see what's happening. And I mean this is a bit of a critique, but you'll see a lot of ethnic working class organizations, whether it is the organization I just mentioned, CAV, Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence. They still exist. They're a very successful organization in New York City. But their power always remains limited by their size, their frame. And so what do? They have no choice but to migrate from being that kind of a formation at the community level to building a C4, a 501c4 structure for political influence, right? So they have no choice but to do that, right? So I think we have to think this thing through. So I am absolutely convinced that we need that structure of ethnic affinity communities of working class formations where they can go across industry, but clearly connected up to a broader working class formation that can exercise real power. And, some kind of a power balance between these two formations. That's a broad answer I'd give. And that's what, for instance, Karthik mentioned that I'm part of something called the National Taxi Workers Alliance, right? I'm also part of something called unfortunately or fortunately, ended up being voted into something called the International Alliance for App-Based Transport Workers. So it's a formation of 17 countries, 23 organizations from across the world, including the Indian Federation of App-Based Transport Workers, right? So now there I see certain formations. We are just entering into a huge negotiation with the ILO in terms of standard setting for platform work, right? They are organized nationally and we are able to see that frame. So I don't know, it's a beginning of an answer. I know it's not a comprehensive answer. Okay, going backwards, what are the questions just prior? Manoj's question about the triumvirate. What can I say, Manoj, except that they are searching. Hindutva, Hindu supremacy in the United States does not have the same rails as the Jewish Zionist right. Right? They certainly don't have the structural conditions available for them to mount that kind of a playbook that connects it. So what is their latest? Their latest is this concept of Hinduphobia. Right? They are desperately trying to advance Hinduphobia. Right? That is, it's very clear that their strategic thinkers sat down around a table with a bunch of Jewish Zionist counterparts and thought it through and said, you need to create a category like this, which will be the same as anti-Semitism, right? It was explicitly strategized, and that's what they're trying to advance. But it's clear it's not necessarily working that easily, right? And we have to fight it. We have to find the precise methods of destroying this idea of Hinduphobia, right? Not because this thing called Hinduphobia just does not exist. White supremacy and white racism is absolutely around, right? But because it's a very, very, very instrumentalized thing, and we have to fight it. We have to find that precise way in which we're going to destroy this category called Hinduphobia. We have a lot of things that are up that we are working on, but I won't discuss them publicly because they're all strategic issues, right? But so that's one. The second part of it in that triumvirate between white supremacists, Zionists and Hindu supremacists is that the white supremacists, you must realize it's actually, we are using white supremacy as a stand-in. The white supremacists alongside it as the Christian right. And the Christian right and the Hindu right are going to run into a contradiction. There is no, it's a matter of when we play that contradiction out. Right? We won't have full control over playing it, but there will be a moment wherein that contradiction between the Christian right and the Hindu right will become important. Who will use it how is a matter of up in the air. Exactly, right? So that it's going to happen, right? It's definitely going to happen. I can see a lot of Christian right-wing organizations chaffing at the bit a little bit, but being held back right now. And so, it's an evolving story. So I think I'll tell you this, it also connects to the textbook fight, right? Hindu supremacy in the United States, I want everybody here in this room to be very clear. I don't know whether we can beat Hindu supremacy in India that easily. It's a long fight. But here, I think they are beatable. They are fully beatable here because of the multicultural contradiction. Because they're constantly hiding behind that and saying we are victims. Right? If we can flip it and say, the one thing, I've done this, I've gone to offices of think tanks, to politicians. You go in there and you start talking to them about, in India there is this problem which is fascism, Hindu nationalism, Hindu Rashtra is growing. There's Brahmanism in India. They are doing this to us, etc. Their eyes glaze over. Whereas you tell them that here in New Jersey they are creating a fight inside a community, right? And you're going to have a law and order problem. You point to Leicester in UK and say, look at what's happening there. And everybody sits up here. So you point to local harms, not harms 10,000 miles away. The fight is here. That's where the textbook fight comes in. Liberalism is committed to a particular idea of education, which we all appreciate, right? Because it's that structure of education that will allow us to bring the reality of caste, of patriarchy, all of that out. Right? Liberal education, how much ever we may be critical of liberals, allows us to do that. And Hindutva is diametrically opposed to it when it comes to something like the textbooks. I always say that we won the first 3 rounds of the textbook fight. Yeah, they got a little bit of publicity out of it, but we won the fight. The last round, we fractured ourselves and we didn't win. Our side got completely divided up. Some people who fought the first 2 rounds stopped working, right? So even the last round, I don't claim we lost the fight, but they gained some ground. That's all. So I don't think the textbook fight is lost. The stage has shifted, it's gone to something bigger, that's all. Connected to that, coming to Manoj Mitta's question around the other right wings, right? Yeah, there is, so you must realize that again, white supremacy is standing in, but there's the Christian right. The other right wings from other communities, a large number of them are entering it through Christianity. If the African American community is connected, if there are segments of it that are moving right, but very, very small communities are moving there. The African American community's amazing capacity to create and keep that leadership. And, the number of African American conservatives you'll get a lot of middle class kind of tax conservatives and all that. But in terms of ideologically on the question of race, on the question of religion, you'll get a very small group, right? Latinos and different national origins have different valences in this. I don't think we should ever create this category called Latinx and just simply leave it there. But a lot of them, their integration is through the Christian right? Through the Catholic Church and through other forms of the church, right? I'm not the Presbyterian, but the evangelical formations. Their presence in places like Brazil, right, is just, literally they went from here to Brazil as an organized force, promoted by certain church formations in the United States, established themselves over a 20-year period, which is the same. See, who brought the Christian right into American politics in a full way? Who brought the Christian right into the Republican Party? Ronald Reagan. Otherwise, the Christian right was always outside the Republican Party. It operated as an independent social force outside both the Democratic and the Republican Party. Reagan brought the Christian right in to the Republican Party, and that's what produced the Tea Party by early 2000s and Donald Trump by 2016. It's a history that begins in 1980, you must remember. It took 35 years for it to mature. That's what I meant earlier when I said you got to look at things in 20 to 30 year blocks. So the Christian right is important, but the Hindu right is going to run into a contradiction with them. I'll stop there. Oh, right.
Oh, I will tell quickly. So, what is the?
I mean, of course, the Hindu rights growth outside the United States, outside India, is aided by the rise of the supremacist forces in India, right? Because it's a particular projection of India that they rest on. It's both ways, right? The Hindu right in India depends on a particular projection of the success of the Hindu American or the Hindu international, that is, the Hindus outside. That is primarily the Brahminical forces and their rise to popularity, to fame, to riches, to prosperity, to all of that, right? So there's a particular celebration of that category in India that aids it. As I always, in the same way that I said that Indian Americans were white before they left the shores of Bombay, in the very same way, it's the other way around. That is, Hindus in India are constantly positioned as somehow that leap of faith on how India is going to become great or Hindu Rashtra is going to become this next big superpower is somehow connected to the superpower status of upper caste Hindu migrants in outside India, right? It's a projection. Oh, look at them, that community of 1 million in the US, they are so big. Of course, we are that, so we'll become that too, right? So that's the projection, right? So it works both ways, but you can see, as I said, they are defeatable here because of their specific contradictions here, and Hindutva in India will get pushed back because of precisely, it's a much longer fight, but it will get pushed back even there, over a period of time because of the nature of the economic forces, right? I mean, you can't keep people hungry and expect them to live off Ram, right? So,
yeah, thank you, Biju. Thank you very much for all your questions, and I hope that definitely many of you have a lot of questions, and Biju will be here throughout the day and during lunch and dinner we can discuss. We are already 9 minutes over time.
Okay.
I would like to finally make a comment, or it cannot be a question, we will discuss later. I would like to bring another variable into this whole socialist forces of this Hindu supremacy project in the US is, interestingly, the Indian consulate here. Why I'm telling is, we attended some of the meetings organized by the Indian consulate when the state officials from India are visiting, and we observe a pattern. They consistently inviting the city council members to the consulate programs, especially the Lily May and Raj Salwal from Fremont. Lily May is a mayor of Fremont, and also Sheila Mohan, who is now currently a mayor, but she was a vice mayor when they passed the Hinduphobia and the resolution against SB 403. And that time the mayor was Hung Wee, Cupertino mayor. And all of them are featured in the consulate programs. And the very cities which passed the resolution on Hinduphobia is Fremont. And the Cupertino did not even stop, not only with the Hinduphobia, but they went the step ahead and passed a resolution against a legislation which gives a protection for the caste oppressed. That is, the caste-based discrimination was tried to be made illegal by SB 403, and the Cupertino passed a resolution against such legislation. And the Hindutva, the Hindu supremacy in the US is very actively supported by the Indian consulate, which we are aware. That's why today we have one of the resolutions condemning these resolutions. And I will stop here, and definitely we will continue to discuss more. And we will wrap up with Biju's final concluding remarks.
No. I literally have 1 minute, 30 seconds, which is to say that I want to emphasize again what I ended with when I was speaking, which is that tail end of the battle, which of what I presented, which is that there is a multiracial right. How that multiracial, what is the theory of that multiracial right? How will they sit around a table? That is what we have to figure out, because that is what's going to decide how much of the quote unquote 5 million Indian Americans are going to keep moving rightward or not, right? That's where the battle lines are. We got to figure that out. And in that context, we must also reflect on the two bigger contradictions, which I referred to briefly, which is neoliberalism and climate change. All of this needs to be brought in. I'll simply say that I don't know all the answers, but I want to engage. So through the rest of the day, please feel free to come up and talk to me. And we can even just exchange information so that we are in a longer term conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, Nalan.